I left for a 3-week business trip and came home to find my backyard turned into a homeless encampment, tents, trash, and people I'd never seen before living on my land like it was theirs. How far would you go if the HOA decided your property was their little charity project? Welcome to my channel. If you love HOA revenge stories, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the board gets a taste of their own medicine. When my plane touched down and I pulled into my driveway after a grueling 3-week overseas consulting job, I expected to find my quiet home just as I'd left it, peaceful, private, and untouched. Instead, I stepped out of my car and froze. My entire backyard had been transformed into something out of a documentary. Tents dotted the lawn where my fire pit used to sit. Makeshift clotheslines ran between my trees, sagging with damp laundry. A cooking fire crackled near my old garden bed. People, dozens of them, were lounging around, chatting, sleeping, and eating, all in my backyard like it was some kind of public park. My patio furniture had been rearranged into a communal hangout spot. Someone had even spray-painted a peace sign on my retaining wall. I stormed toward the gate, heart pounding in disbelief, only to have a man I'd never met step forward and smile like I was the guest. "Hey, you must be the homeowner. Don't worry, we're keeping things clean," he said, like that was supposed to make me feel better about the fact that strangers were living on my land. I shoved past him and ran inside, tossed my suitcase in the hallway, and immediately called the HOA emergency line. It went straight to voicemail. The second number I had, for the HOA secretary, rang 4 times before I got a text. "All inquiries regarding the temporary transitional housing project must go through the board. Community meeting Monday at 7 p.m. Thank you." Temporary transitional housing? What the hell was that supposed to mean? I marched outside and cornered a neighbor, Carol, who was watching the scene unfold from her upstairs window. "Did you see what they did?" I asked. She nodded, pale-faced. "They came with contractors 4 days ago. Said the board approved it unanimously. Said your lot was eligible since it was unutilized during your absence. I didn't know what to do." Unutilized? My blood boiled. Just because I left town for work doesn't mean my land stopped being mine. Monday couldn't come fast enough. The community center was packed, every seat taken. The air was thick with tension and whispers as residents craned their necks to see how I'd react. The board sat smugly at the front, 5 members in their matching navy blue HOA polos, each with a branded folder in front of them like they were the United Nations. Karen Walters, the board president, tapped her gavel like she thought she was a judge. "Let's begin," she said cheerfully. First order of business, addressing concerns regarding the emergency housing initiative launched in cooperation with Shelter United. I shot to my feet. "Addressing concerns?" I barked. "You trespassed. You invaded private property and turned my yard into a damn campsite without my permission." Karen gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Your property, Mr. Monroe, was deemed temporarily eligible for community outreach under Article 18, Section 7 of the Emergency Response Clause in the HOA Charter." "Emergency response?" I snapped. "There's no hurricane, no fire. You just dumped 20 people into my backyard because you could." "Because we should," chimed in Susan Tran, the HOA treasurer. "We had a moral obligation to do something about the housing crisis." I looked around the room for support, but the board had anticipated everything. Printed signs near the podium read, "Let's be compassionate," and "Community before property." The trap was already laid. "You don't have the right to give away my land," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Karen opened her folder and read from a page. "The charter gives us authority to allocate underutilized spaces for temporary humanitarian projects in cases where the primary resident is absent and the land is deemed dormant. Since you did not file a travel notification form, your land qualified." That made half the room gasp. "You think not telling you I was on a work trip gives you the right to gift my property to strangers?" I said. "That clause was written for natural disasters, not whatever this is." The board unanimously approved the resolution. Karen said with finality, "Your yard is being leased. Yes, leased to Shelter United for a 6-week trial program. It's nonprofit, tax-exempt, and already funded. You will be reimbursed for any utilities used during this period. Please remember to submit copies of your next water and electric bills." My fists clenched. "And what if I say no?" Karen's smile dropped. Then we'll have no choice but to cite you for obstruction of an HOA humanitarian initiative. That carries a $500 fine per day of noncompliance." Laughter erupted from the audience, some amused, some horrified. I stood frozen, humiliated, with no power to stop it. The next morning, a red notice appeared on my door. Violation: hostile behavior toward community initiative volunteers. $250 fine. Below it, another. Violation: failure to submit travel notification prior to extended absence. $350 fine. By noon, I'd racked up $1,200 in bogus charges, all tied to non-cooperation. When I asked for a copy of the humanitarian clause they referenced, I was handed a 74-page charter full of vague language about temporary easements and transitional zoning opportunities. I combed every page. Nowhere did it say the board could override property ownership. Nowhere did it say they could lease land they didn't own. But the clause about absentee owners, that was real. I had never even heard of a travel notification form. It had been quietly added to the charter last quarter, buried in a footnote about community safety. One obscure bylaw, and the board used it like a crowbar to pry open my gate. I tried to speak to Karen directly, called, texted, emailed, no response. So I tried Susan. She answered. "Mr. Monroe, I understand you're upset," she said patronizingly. "But this is about the greater good. You work in tech, right? Don't you believe in disrupting old systems?" I nearly laughed. "Tech doesn't mean breaking into someone's land and giving it away like a raffle prize. You're playing Robin Hood with private property. It's temporary," she said. "And we're already receiving excellent press coverage. Channel 9 did a segment yesterday. The headline was, 'Suburb Leads the Way in Homeless Reform.' I hung up before I said something that would really get me fined." Over the next week, the situation devolved. Volunteers came daily, unloading crates of food and supplies into my backyard like it was a distribution center. A portable shower was wheeled onto my driveway. A generator buzzed loudly next to my air conditioning unit. My yard, once pristine and landscaped, was now a muddy camp, and I was living inside the world's worst hostel with no say in the matter. I spoke to my neighbors, some sympathetic, some scared of getting involved. Carol whispered, "We didn't think they'd actually do it. We thought it was symbolic. Now we're afraid we're next." And that's when I realized this wasn't about me anymore. This was a test. The HOA had picked a fight they thought I wouldn't win. They thought I'd just accept the fines, shut up, and wait for their little project to end. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to turn their rules inside out and burn their whole scheme to the ground legally. They wanted to play the bylaw game? Good. I was about to write my own. But first, I had some digging to do, and I was going to start with the real reason they chose my backyard for their little humanitarian initiative. The moment I realized this wasn't just a personal attack, but a coordinated abuse of power, I shifted gears from furious homeowner to cold, methodical investigator. I cleared out the spare bedroom and turned it into a command center. Whiteboard on the wall, folders stacked by subject, HOA bylaws on one monitor, zoning maps on the other. First on the list was figuring out exactly what clause the HOA was using to justify this insanity. They kept referencing Article 18, Section 7, something about temporary community easement rights during emergencies or for civic betterment programs. Sounded noble, but when I read the fine print, I found the ugly truth. This clause had been quietly amended just 4 months earlier. The original version dealt only with structural emergencies, collapsed trees, fire hazards, things like that. But the new version included language about temporarily underutilized parcels that can benefit the greater community. That phrase was vague enough to be weaponized, and it had been. The amended clause was slipped into a 78-page update package mailed out during the holidays, when most people, myself included, tossed it in a drawer unopened. What's worse, the clause had a built-in silence equals consent rule. If you didn't file a written objection within 30 days, you were considered in agreement. I hadn't even been in the country when the clock started ticking. That gave me my first clue. This wasn't reactive, it was premeditated. They had been planning this for months. I called the county zoning office, pretending to be a curious resident, and asked whether my property had been reclassified or earmarked for public use. The clerk sounded confused. Nope. Your lot is strictly residential, not zoned for multi-occupancy or public access of any kind. Why do you ask? I thanked her and hung up. That was confirmation. Whatever the HOA was doing, it wasn't supported by the county. Then, I started digging through HOA meeting minutes. Most were publicly available through their online portal. I found a session from 2 months ago, attendance light, discussion vague. But buried near the end was an entry labeled Item 9. Civic Outreach Trial Proposal. Moved by Karen Walters and seconded by Susan Tran. No homeowner comments recorded, no vote tallies, just motion passed. I went further back and saw the first mention of Shelter United, an organization I'd never heard of, 6 months prior. I looked them up. Their website was slick, polished, and full of buzzwords. Compassionate solutions, community-based rehousing, partnering with forward-thinking neighborhoods. But when I clicked on the contact page, there was no address, just a P.O. box and a Gmail account. That was the first red flag. The second came when I checked their nonprofit status. They were registered, sure, but as a 501, 4, not a 501, 3, which meant they weren't required to disclose donors or financial details the same way charitable organizations were. That made them a perfect front for funneling money with minimal oversight. I called in a favor from an old college buddy named Colin, who worked in property law and owed me for helping him get out of a very embarrassing crypto scam. I sent him everything I had, meeting minutes, zoning confirmations, and the Shelter United info. This stinks, he texted back 15 minutes later. Send me your HOA's last 3 quarterly filings. I want to check something. While I waited, I did what I should have done sooner. I checked my security cameras. Before I left on my trip, I'd installed a Ring floodlight cam on the back of my garage and a second, motion-sensitive camera by the side gate. I hadn't reviewed the footage since coming home. I'd been too distracted by the tents in my yard and the circus that followed. When I finally loaded the video files, I nearly threw my laptop across the room. 5 days into my trip, a white city truck pulled up outside my house. Karen Walters got out wearing a safety vest over her tennis outfit, clipboard in hand. She was followed by 2 men, both HOA board members, dragging tape measures and spray cans. They walked around my backyard for nearly 20 minutes, marking areas in orange paint, measuring distances, writing notes. The next day, a different truck showed up, this one with the Shelter United logo magnetically attached to the side. 2 people in matching t-shirts opened the gate and started setting up pop-up tents. Over the course of 3 days, the entire homeless shelter was assembled in stages. First the tents, then the power cords, then the supply bins, then the portable bathroom unit. All of it happened while I was out of the country. The board had orchestrated the entire operation with full knowledge that I wasn't home. My absence wasn't an inconvenience. They had planned around it. Colin called me back that night, voice sharp with urgency. You're not going to believe this. I looked through their filings and guess what I found? The HOA applied for and received a $75,000 Transitional Housing Initiative grant from the State Community Development Fund. The application listed your property as a community-donated parcel being repurposed for emergency outreach. Donated, as in given freely, by you. I was speechless. They forged my consent? I asked. They didn't forge it, Colin replied. They just never included a signature page. I think they counted on the committee not asking. It was a sickeningly plausible loophole. Most grant reviewers never visit the site. They trust what's submitted on paper. You want the worst part? He added. That money's already been paid. The HOA got the first half up front, $37,500, and the rest is scheduled after a 30-day compliance check. So they were getting paid to let strangers live on my land. I was livid. I spent the rest of the night compiling every document, screenshot, timestamp, and email into a thick report labeled Operation Backyard Scam. But just when I thought I understood the full scope, something happened that took it to an even darker place. One of the unhoused residents, Greg, approached me as I was hauling my trash bins down the driveway. He was a quiet guy, probably late 50s, always respectful. Hey man, he said, voice low, can I talk to you? I think we're being used. That caught my attention. What do you mean? I asked. He looked around nervously, then pulled out a crumpled flyer. This is what they handed us when we got placed here. It said we'd have access to a social worker, daily hot meals, and job application help. But we haven't seen any of that. They drop off bulk food once a week and that's it. No medical people, no caseworkers, no nothing. I took the flyer and read it. It was branded with the Shelter United logo and filled with promises that clearly weren't being kept. They told us this was city-supported, he said. Said it was a pilot program that could lead to permanent housing, but none of that's happened. And yesterday, one of the ladies here said she overheard one of the board people say they only needed us to stay long enough to check a box. Then we'd be moved somewhere else. Did you hear a name? I asked. He nodded. Karen, blonde lady with the big SUV. Figures. I spent the next few days digging into Shelter United's other programs and found a disturbing pattern. Every neighborhood they'd partnered with had hosted a temporary camp for around 30-45 days, then abruptly dismantled it with no follow-up support. The organization's website always touted successful pilot runs, but none of the people actually involved had anything good to say. Worse, I found online reviews from former residents describing unsanitary conditions, neglect, even theft of personal belongings. Shelter United wasn't a charity. It was a PR machine designed to collect grants, show up just long enough to take pictures, and vanish before anyone noticed they didn't deliver on their promises. That's when the final puzzle piece fell into place. I obtained a list of Shelter United's board members, and wouldn't you know it, one of them was listed as Robert Walters, Karen's husband. The entire project was a kickback scheme disguised as a feel-good initiative. The HOA got to pat themselves on the back, Karen's husband got paid, and I got to live in the middle of a public relations stunt. And the people supposedly being helped, they were treated like pawns, given promises they'd never see fulfilled, then moved on to the next neighborhood like forgotten stage props. I looked out at my yard, at the people trying to carve out a sense of dignity in a situation built on lies, and I made a decision. I wasn't just going to take down the HOA. I was going to make sure everyone involved in this fraud answered for it. The board thought I was just another homeowner they could steamroll. What they didn't know was that I was already assembling something stronger than a legal defense. I was building a case, and when it hit, it wouldn't just shake up a few bylaws. It would burn their entire scheme to the ground. I knew exactly what I had to do the moment I realized the homeless people in my yard weren't just victims of circumstance. They were victims of the HOA's lies, the same way I was. If I just threw them out, I'd be doing the board's dirty work for them, cleaning up their PR mess while they collected their grant money and patted themselves on the back. But if I kept them played along just long enough to flip the board's own tools against them, I could end this game entirely and do it legally. I wasn't going to fight fire with fire. I was going to fight paperwork with paperwork and burn them down with their own rules. The first step was simple. Don't resist. I smiled at Greg and told him I'd look into the situation. Then I let the HOA think I was giving up. I stopped arguing at meetings, stopped appealing the fines, and started acting like the model cooperative resident. Meanwhile, I was spending every night and weekend combing through HOA bylaws with a fine-toothed comb. That's when I found it. Buried in Article 22, Section 11.6 was a single sentence that made my heart race. Any structure designated as a community asset that exceeds 200 square feet and remains unused for more than 90 consecutive days must be made available for general resident use until regular board activity resumes. I read that line 5 times, then again out loud just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. The HOA's office building, an overbuilt, freshly renovated 2-story monstrosity with a $60,000 HVAC upgrade and polished floors, was 1,480 square feet. And ever since the Emergency Housing Initiative started, all HOA business had been done remotely or over Zoom. That meant, by their own rules, the building was technically available. And I knew just the people who could use it. The timing had to be precise. The bylaws said 90 consecutive days of inactivity, so I needed proof. I installed a small motion camera across the street, aimed at the HOA building's front entrance. Every day that passed without a board member stepping foot inside added another brick to my foundation. At the same time, I filed a series of anonymous, public use interest notices to the HOA's general inbox, asking if the board had any plans to resume meetings in the building. I never got a reply, which, again, was perfect. Silence would be their undoing. On day 91, I called my lawyer. Her name was Yasmin Cross. Brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely fearless. I handed her the file I'd been building and said, "I want to convert the HOA office into a certified transitional shelter." She didn't even blink. "You want to house the people from your backyard in their boardroom?" she asked. "Exactly," I said, "and I want to do it legally, using their own bylaws." She smirked like I just handed her a puzzle. "I'll make some calls." Within 48 hours, we had filed paperwork with the county to register the building as a temporary residential facility under the Local Emergency Lodging Act. It's a real statute, rarely used, that allows certain types of buildings, especially community-owned ones, to be repurposed as public shelters in cases of need. All it required was a floor plan, a site inspection, and proof that it wasn't currently being used for its original purpose. I had all three. While the paperwork was moving, I started the renovations. The old keycard access system had already been disabled months ago, after the building closed for cleaning, so I brought in a contractor, paid out of pocket, to install ADA-compliant ramps at both entrances. I bought used bunk beds from a local church that had recently remodeled its youth camp and hauled them in myself. I installed 4 portable showers in the rear parking area, ran plumbing lines, and even set up a basic security system to protect the residents. One of the guys from my backyard, Marvin, turned out to be an electrician before life knocked him sideways. He rewired half the building to make sure it could handle the load from the appliances we were bringing in. Greg handled the organization side, rotating chores, cleaning schedules, food prep. The truth is, these weren't people who needed charity. They needed structure, space, and a reason to believe someone gave a damn. And now, for the first time in a long time, they had that. Once everything was in place, Yasmin scheduled an inspection. 2 women from the county housing department showed up with clipboards and hard hats, expecting chaos. Instead, they found a fully functional mini-shelter, clean, safe, and thoughtfully organized. "And this is all staffed by volunteers?" one asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "All former residents of the previous encampment. We're giving them dignity and employment at the same time." The other woman smiled. "I've never seen an HOA building used like this before." "Neither have I," I replied. "But the bylaws are pretty clear." That afternoon, the county certified the building as a transitional shelter and sent notice to the HOA. 48 hours later, I received a cease and desist letter from Karen Walters, dripping with threats and official-sounding nonsense. Yasmin read it and laughed. "They're panicking. Can they kick us out?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not without proving they've resumed full official use of the building. And since they haven't even posted a meeting agenda in 3 months, good luck." Then came the cherry on top. According to the HOA charter, official board business must be conducted on HOA property unless special circumstances exist. They had cited public safety as their reason for meeting online. But now that restrictions were lifted and the building was officially in use by residents, that excuse no longer applied. Which meant the board had nowhere to legally conduct their business. The office now belonged to the very people they displaced. Word spread fast, first among the residents, who started showing up at the HOA building confused and curious. Some were angry, others were just amused. One man knocked on the door and asked if he could rent the conference room for his daughter's birthday party. A woman asked if she could use the copier. The shelter residents answered politely and took notes. Meanwhile, the board scrambled. Karen tried to hold a Zoom meeting from her kitchen, but halfway through, one of the homeowners asked, "Shouldn't this be taking place in the official building?" Karen's face turned the color of a sunburned tomato. Then she abruptly ended the meeting. A day later, the board tried to retake the office by calling in a security company. They showed up, barked at the residents, and waved around laminated IDs. Unfortunately for them, Yasmin had already anticipated that move. She had a restraining order ready and served it on the spot. "You're trespassing on a registered transitional housing facility protected under the County Emergency Lodging Act," she told the lead guard. "And unless you'd like to explain to the sheriff why you're intimidating residents in the middle of a housing crisis, I suggest you leave." They left. By week's end, the office had become a symbol. Local news picked up the story. spinning it as an inspiring case of community empowerment. Interviews ran back to back with Greg and Marvin talking about how they went from sleeping under a tarp to managing the most organized shelter in the state. Even the mayor made a comment on social media, praising the creative use of underutilized community space. Karen's perfect image was crumbling. She tried to paint me as a radical homeowner abusing loopholes for personal revenge. But by then, it was too late. Public opinion was on my side. Every attack she launched only made her look worse. And the best part? The longer the shelter remained open, the harder it would be to displace it. Under county law, any facility in operation for over 90 days could petition for permanent status. So we kept things running. I filed for a small business grant to support the shelter's operating costs and got approved. We upgraded the kitchen, installed lockers, bought proper uniforms for the staff. By the end of the month, the former HOA office had a waiting list for beds and a reputation for being one of the cleanest, most efficient facilities in the county. Karen, meanwhile, was holding HOA meetings from her garage, yelling over leaf blowers and trying to act like everything was fine. It wasn't. Her grip on the neighborhood was breaking. People were asking questions she couldn't answer. Why had she authorized a project without resident consent? Why had Shelter United vanished without completing their contract? And most importantly, why did her husband sit on the board of the very nonprofit that profited from all of it? I didn't even have to press charges yet. The court of public opinion had already turned on her. All I had to do now was wait and make sure the shelter stayed in place just long enough to become permanent. By the time I filed the lawsuit, the board was already flailing. Karen Walters was barely keeping it together, hiding behind canned statements and scripted HOA memos, hoping the whole thing would blow over. But the truth had roots now, thick, documented, and dug in deeper than the garbage bylaws she once weaponized. With the help of Yasmin, my lawyer, we filed a civil suit in county court for unauthorized use of private land, unlawful trespass, and intentional misrepresentation in a government grant application. That last one? That was the nuke. Because once we tied the grant fraud to her husband's seat on the board of Shelter United, we weren't just talking about HOA violations anymore. We were talking felony-level deception. And trust me, Karen knew it. When the lawsuit hit her inbox, I'm told she cried in the middle of a spin class and canceled the HOA's annual summer block brunch the same day. At the first hearing, her lawyer, a guy who looked like he charged by the blink, tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. The homeowner consented passively, he argued, pointing to the lack of response to the travel notification form. But we had timelines, we had zoning documents, we had county statements, and most importantly, we had surveillance footage. Crystal clear videos of Karen and her board minions measuring my backyard like they were scoping out a construction site. Footage of tents going up while I was 6,000 miles away, my phone set to airplane mode and my mailbox overflowing. The judge, an older man with a gruff voice and zero tolerance for nonsense, leaned back after the defense's argument and muttered, "You people thought that was legal?" That was the moment I knew. We'd already won. But the board didn't go down quietly. They dragged out discovery, filed motion after motion to delay the hearing, claimed the office building was technically still in use because they kept a printer plugged in. I almost admired the creativity. Almost. What they didn't know was that during all this, the county had quietly launched its own audit into their use of public funds. A few anonymous documents had found their way into the right inboxes, courtesy of my new connections in housing services. So by the time we walked into the final courtroom showdown, the HOA's defense was less a legal team and more a collapsing sandcastle. Their own treasurer had resigned a week before the trial, citing personal ethics concerns. 2 board members followed her. That left Karen and Susan nervous, alone, and trying to pretend like they weren't sweating through their matching blazers. In court, Yasmin delivered the opening statement like it was a TED Talk. She outlined everything. The forged timeline, the bogus grant application, the underutilized land excuse they pulled from thin air, and the way they manipulated the system to cash in on a humanitarian image while dumping liability onto an innocent homeowner. Then she pulled out the final exhibit, the printed screenshot from Shelter United's own website claiming the property had been donated by me. My client never consented, Yasmin said, staring straight at the judge. They knew that, and they profited anyway. Karen's lawyer tried to counter, saying I didn't object soon enough. But Yasmin hit back with the travel logs from my trip, the federal flight records, the security footage. Then came the real hammer, the zoning official's testimony. He confirmed under oath that the HOA had never received authorization to use the land for anything other than single-family residential purposes. The Shelter United project had never been approved at the county level. It shouldn't have existed, he said, not on that property. The judge didn't even take the weekend. On Friday morning, he delivered the ruling. Full damages awarded in my favor, $145,000 in compensation for unauthorized land use, property damage, stress, and temporary loss of access. The court also issued an injunction barring the HOA from attempting to evict the current residents of the HOA office building, confirming that it was legally protected as a transitional housing facility under county jurisdiction. The building, in effect, was no longer theirs. Karen tried to argue that it was never officially donated, but the judge stopped her cold. You called it donated in your grant paperwork. You accepted public money. You can't undo that just because it's inconvenient now. The fallout was instant. The board lost its primary meeting space overnight. Without access to the building, they were forced to hold their next official HOA meeting in the only available option, a rented trailer parked in the corner of the community dog park. The residents were not pleased. Rain leaked through the vent, and a confused pug urinated on Karen's chair mid-meeting. Homeowners began organizing an emergency vote to replace the entire board. Within 2 weeks, 4 members had resigned. Only Karen remained, clinging to her title like a life raft as everything else sank around her. Meanwhile, their insurance premiums skyrocketed. The HOA's liability provider refused to renew their policy unless they restructured leadership, citing patterned misconduct and high-risk governance. The final nail, Shelter United's grant was flagged for review, and they were placed under investigation for misuse of public funds. The P.O. box they listed as a headquarters was suddenly closed. The website disappeared. Karen's husband, Robert, resigned from the nonprofit board the same day. But the best part wasn't the lawsuit. It wasn't the settlement check or the resignations or even the public humiliation. It was what came after. I got my backyard back, completely restored. The tents came down, but not before each of the residents found actual permanent housing placements through the local outreach office. Greg and Marvin stayed in touch. Greg now works with the housing department full-time, helping manage outreach in other communities. Marvin launched a mobile handyman business. I hired him to rebuild my patio deck. Solid guy. Meticulous work. The grass is green again. The fire pit is back. And the same gate that once welcomed in a PR stunt now stays locked, with a brand new camera installed up top. Just for fun. And the HOA? They still exist. Barely. Their meetings take place in that sad little trailer now. 10 folding chairs, 1 generator, and no authority over my property. Sometimes I walk past on my morning jog, earbuds in, coffee in hand, and wave. Karen doesn't wave back. She just stares, her smile tight, her posture stiff, flanked by the few remaining board loyalists who still think their navy blue polos mean something. But here's the best part. Legally, they still own the building. But practically, it's not theirs anymore. Every day they have to see it. Our old HOA office, now home to the people they tried to exploit, operating as a registered shelter with full legal protections. They can't use it. They can't sell it. And they sure as hell can't get rid of the people inside. It's a monument now, not to their generosity, but to their greed, their arrogance, and their downfall. So, I sit on my porch most evenings these days, drink in hand, peace restored. No tents, no generators, no violations taped to my door. Just me, a rebuilt backyard, and the knowledge that I didn't just win, I rewrote the rules. And just across the street, in the shell of what was once their kingdom, the HOA now shares a building with the very people they tried to erase. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's petty. And sometimes it moves in permanently.